But we are at an important fork in the road. I think we are coming up on the global realization that there's a lot more paper gold than there is real gold, that the central banks of the world, especially the Federal Reserve, have been leasing out gold in increasing quantities as the price rises, to quote Alan Greenspan, former head of the Federal Reserve, in congressional testimony. So we're coming to the point where they're not going to be able to keep this scam up anymore. The vast majority of the people in Congress are clueless. And so your listeners, I think, could play a very, very big role in educating their lawmakers on this before the crisis hits, because I tell you, if and when the crisis hits, and I expect it may be just around the corner, the establishment's going to have all the prepared talking points. It's going to be like we saw in 2008. If you don't pass this, there's going to be martial law, the banking system's going to collapse, people are going to starve. So they've got to be prepared in advance to move us in the right direction, and it's going to be a heavy lift.
This is Kaiser Johnson with Liberty and Finance. With premiums on U.S. 90% silver constitutional coinage at multi-year lows, this may be an ideal time to swap silver bars or rounds for 90% silver and gain all the benefits of U.S. mint lineage, legal tender status, non-reportability, and fractional utility. So right now we're running a special where we will swap any of your silver bars or rounds for 90% constitutional silver at a minimal premium difference. Call us for details.
Welcome back to Liberty and Finance. We're delighted to have this returning guest. Alex Newman is a journalist and author. He's a contributor at Epoch Times. He travels around the world. He's lived around the world. He's comes from deep connections with diplomats, etc. He has a finger to the pulse of what's going on all over the world. We're going to talk to him about both liberty and finance. No mistake in that. Alex, thank you for joining us here again on Liberty and Finance.
Great to be here. Thank you, Dunnigan.
I want to remind everybody today we're recording this on Monday, March 17, 2025. And the first thing we wanted to talk with you about is your view of Trump overturning the Biden-era pardons based on an auto pen scandal where it's claimed that Biden didn't even sign those pardons, those pre-pardons, which were, we spoke with you about this last time, whether they're even on a shaky legal ground, etc. But this notion is they may not even have been signed by the president, as might not a bunch of other stuff too. But what do we know about this, and where do you think it's leading?
This is a massive scandal, then again. There is no way that we can look at these pardons and think they're legitimate. I've said from the very beginning, they ought to be treated as illegitimate. And there's a variety of different ways you could look at it that make them illegitimate, not just the auto signing and the robo pen, whatever. This is unprecedented in history, where you just have a blanket pardon for any crime you may have committed over a 10-year period. That is simply absurd. The pardon power was intended to be used by the president in an example where there was a miscarriage of justice for a particular crime. Hey, this guy was accused of this and he probably didn't do it, or this guy was accused of this, but there were circumstances that should have been taken into consideration. Not 10 whole years of crimes we're just going to wipe away with the magic pen for hundreds, if not thousands, of criminals who weren't just committing regular crimes, right? And I mean, corruption's bad enough. In many cases, these are people who were actively working to subvert our constitutional order. These were people who I would argue in some cases might even be accused of treason. And so I think it's way past time for justice to be carried out here. And I was very encouraged even before Donald Trump did this to see that a number of state attorneys general were looking at possible state charges against some of these people like Anthony Fauci. We cannot give away the signal that this kind of lawlessness, this kind of crazy criminality is going to go unpunished, because what that will do, aside from just letting off the perpetrators, it will encourage more such lawlessness and criminality in the future. So kudos to President Trump for this. I hope the DOJ will now use every tool in their toolbox.
The principle you just articulated there, that people are very perceptive. People are smart. They see the body language. They see how things really play out for those at high and prominent positions, and they follow their lead. Or they assume more is going to come in the same. We've seen that when police were being told to stand down all around the country and the rioters were being allowed to loot and burn and that sort of thing, no punishment, whatever. We saw telegraphed or explicitly stated, y'all come on in on the southern border for how long? More than almost a decade. And it caused complete behavior shift on people from the foreign countries, 70 different countries coming across the border while demoralizing our own staff they were supposed to be border agents, et cetera, and the people who are living in those states being affected by this directly, and others around the country. We've seen double standard of justice when it comes to destroying evidence and mishandling of classified documents and wiping servers and all kinds of things. But it seemed like, well, if the top leaders are doing it, then that's the direction that things are going, and it tends to just, you see an entire culture of systemic and institutionalized corruption and miscarriage of justice that has been called the weaponization of the intelligence, weaponization of the Justice Department, et cetera. Do we have reason to believe, even if Trump is able to prevail here and say that those were inappropriate or basically void on their face because they weren't even signed by the president, et cetera, those pardons, pre-pardons, that there will be the stomach to overcome whatever the magic Teflon coating has been that has kept from having truth, reconciliation, justice, and accountability actually take its course?
Well, it's a good question, Doug. In my own conversations with some of the people involved here, the answer would be yes. There is a very, very serious willingness and desire to make sure that justice comes about. And some of these conversations were public. I had Kash Patel on my show for 30 minutes to talk about the government gangsters that he ran up against and his desire to bring them to justice. So I think unless the rogue courts try to shut all of this down, there's a very real chance that we're going to see some serious accountability here. There are still some swamp monsters within the Trump administration, including on the Justice Department side, but there's a lot of decent, honorable people there, and some of them were personally targeted in the most vicious and vile ways possible by the previous administration. So I think the left and the fake media will try to frame this as an issue of vengeance. It's not an issue of vengeance. It's an issue of accountability. It's an issue of justice. And the crimes weren't just perpetrated against Trump and his family and General Flynn and Steve Bannon and Paul Manafort and Roger Stone. And, we could keep listing, Peter Navarro. These were crimes perpetrated against the American people. These were crimes perpetrated against our constitutional order. And there's a lot of people within the administration who understand that. And they understand that if we allow that to fly this time, it's going to come back with a vengeance in 4 years, 8 years, 12 years, however long it takes these people to regain power, and we simply cannot allow that for everybody's sake.
Well, we certainly hope that there will be truth, reconciliation, and accountability and upholding of the rule of law and of our constitutional basis for our constitutional republic. We also wanted to get your temperature on Commerce Secretary Lutnick's comments, if not abolishing, at least curtailing the IRS by eliminating income tax, federal income tax on families making less than $150,000 has been discussed. Do you have any reason to believe that might actually take place, or what do we think is most likely to outcome from that?
That's a good question, Doug. And I would start by saying I don't trust Howard Lutnick. He may be a nice guy. I don't know him, but he was raising money for Hillary Clinton in 2015, and he was right at the center of the effort to build the global carbon markets. So, I like what he's saying very much. Whether we should take him at his word, I think remains to be seen. But we know that Trump has a history of expressing desires like this, right? Before he was elected the first time around, he was talking about the desirability of going back to a gold monetary system where they wouldn't be able to destroy and devalue our currency, where they wouldn't be able to steal our purchasing power. So Donald Trump understands these things far better than people realize, both on the Federal Reserve front and also on how the income tax was necessary to support this fraudulent monetary system that we have today. So I think Trump would like to see some really, really significant changes like that. He's talked publicly about the desire to have tariffs once again become the primary source of revenue for the federal government. I think that's a very good idea. And I think to the extent that it's in Trump's power, we'll see a move in that direction. But obviously, a lot's going to depend on Congress. And I think all of your viewers know very, very well. Then again, the Republican margin is razor thin. And when you factor in the fact that a very significant chunk of the GOP caucus is what we call rhinos, it's going to be very hard to get big changes like that through Congress right now.
You've also been watching closely developments regarding the Department of Education, and with an eye towards liberty that you and I have discussed about that in the past regarding the rights of parents to determine what their children are exposed to, et cetera, the right of educational choice, et cetera. What's going on at the Department of Education that's worthy of our attention right now?
Well, there does seem to be a very serious effort to downsize the Department of Education. About half of the staff now, it looks like, are going to be pushed out the door, and that's a very good start. But I would tell people, even abolishing the Department of Education is just a baby step in the right direction. It's not going to magically solve all these problems. It's not going to be safe to send your child to your local government brainwash camp just because the U.S. Department of Education is shut down. I would also caution that there are very, very serious efforts by the swamp, by the deep state, to sabotage this effort and to really just redistribute all these functions from the U.S. Department of Education to HHS and Justice and Labor and Interior and State, which would not only not be a step in the right direction, be a step in the wrong direction, because now we've allowed all these new bureaucracies to have influence in our public school system. We've scattered these functions across a range of institutions, making it much harder to track. So I think we need to be very careful here. And there's another thing that I'm concerned about, too. There are powerful people around Trump who are pushing him to create a federal school choice program where the government would basically just give you free money. And I think Trump is very well intentioned here, but I don't think he understands the danger of this fully yet. UNESCO put out a report a couple years ago where they said the way to bring non-state education providers under government control was by giving them free government money. So we need to be very wary of that. There's another proposal that Trump is seriously entertaining that I think is far better, that would allow parents to just withhold some of their normal tax money from the regime if they decide to do the right thing and pull their children out of the government school. I think that's a much safer option than having our money go to D.C. and then come back to us with handcuffs attached. So this is an ongoing debate, and everybody watching us right now has the opportunity to influence this debate. So call up your member of Congress, call up the White House, and make your voice heard. We want the Department of Education gone. We want federal influence in education completely removed, but we don't want to replace that with a new system that might end up bringing homeschoolers and private schoolers under government control as well.
Yeah, along, we should plug in, we'll put a comment in the description of this video. We'll put a link to your publicschoolexit.org, is it?
Yes, publicschoolexit.com is ministry. I'm a volunteer there, even though I got a fancy title, but we want to help every pastor, every parent in this country get the children under their influence out of this system and get them a real education.
All right. You've also been following some very hot spots around the world internationally. South Africa, there's been a lot of angst coming out of South Africa. Some have even called it a reverse genocide going on down there. Can you talk to us? You lived in South Africa. Can you talk to us about what we know about what's going on there, why we need to be aware of it?
Well, from a finance perspective, the regime has just basically dropped the mask now. And anybody who really paid attention to what was going on back in the 90s understood that this was a communist revolution disguised as a freedom struggle. And now they're just dropping the mask. Now they're entering what they call the second phase of the National Democratic Revolution, which is the phase where they don't even pretend anymore. They just say, yeah, we're commies. We've always been commies. And yeah, we're going to take your stuff. They call it expropriation without compensation, which is a fancy way of saying we're going to steal your stuff. And so for investors, you really want to pay close attention to this. You don't want to invest a bunch of money in South Africa just to have this gaggle of criminals say, well, yeah, we're just going to have to expropriate that from you because you got the wrong skin color, or because your business partner doesn't have the right skin color, or because we don't like you, or because, you know, whatever we say. So it's very, very dangerous situation there. And what's going on with Trump has, of course, recently passed an executive order promising protection to the Afrikaners. The Afrikaners are a very interesting people group. They are largely descended from the Dutch, Danes, French, Germans, etc. But they are, of course, a unique African nation. Sometimes they see themselves as an African tribe. And they are under relentless assault right now from the government. You've got top-level people in the government going on TV, filling up stadiums and saying, you know, bring me my machine gun. We're going to shoot all these people. And it's really horrific. No people would tolerate this madness in any other country, in any other context. But because it's happening in South Africa against the hated Afrikaner, suddenly we're supposed to say, oh, yeah, that's fine. It's vile. It's horrific. South Africa deserves much better. And of course, unfortunately, the U.S. government played a major role in bringing this situation about, just like they did in former Rhodesia turned Zimbabwe. And so, I think we have some obligation to at least help some of the victims that were created as a result of outrageous U.S. foreign policy.
You just did an interview with a Romanian presidential candidate, and it seems to reveal, if I understand correctly, what's going on there is a big covert pushback by the globalist deep state that's entrenched in Romania to prevent any populist or nationalist candidate from coming to power. Can you talk to us about what you're learning about there and why we should care?
Yeah, what's happening in Romania is hugely significant, and it's not just significant for Romanians and Europeans. It's significant for Americans, too, because we're seeing these kinds of things happening all over the world. So in Romania, they're about to have a presidential election. They actually already had the first round of their presidential election, and the man who won, Călin Georgescu, won the first round, was actually detained by authorities in Romania, and now he has officially been disqualified, so he cannot even run for president anymore, even though he won the first round. And they're alleging that the Russians might have bought some social media ads to support him, and so he's not allowed to be in the presidential race.
Wait, where have we heard that before? A Russian dossier?
I know. It's the exact same narrative that they used here against Donald Trump. And you know me, Dunnigan. Your viewers have, some of them heard me quite a few times. I am no apologist for Vladimir Putin and his gangster regime, not by any stretch of the imagination. I think he's very dangerous. I think what he has done over a period of many years deserves to be condemned. But you can't just call everybody you disagree with a Russian puppet and expect the world to believe you, right? That's foolishness. And so the new guy who has now jumped in. He's now considered the front runner. His name is George Simion. He's the founder and the chairman of the second largest political party in Romania. And very similar to Georgescu. He's a patriot. He wants to put Romania first. He wants to stop World War III. He doesn't want that NATO base being used as a springboard to launch the Third World War with the Russians. He's advocating for the preservation of family in the face of globalist assault. He's advocating for the preservation of sovereignty in the face of globalist schemes from Brussels. And so they're after him now. And I just had the privilege of bringing him on my show for about 10 minutes earlier today to break down the latest there. And Americans are really not paying attention. I mean, the fake media is saying the far right guy is now the front runner. What they mean is the guy who doesn't agree with the globalist craziness is the front runner. So people should be watching because they're doing the same thing there that they did here, and they will do it again here if they're not stopped.
Well, even more recently was Rand Paul being branded a tool of Putin because he was just asking, how are we going to keep accountability and keep track of all these billions that we're sending over to Ukraine, how it's being used? And now here, I mean, that he was just absolutely, ostracized for that in the Congress. And yet now we see, we don't know where these billions went to. And now they're asking for more. And now finally Trump is questioning it and pushing back for the first time. So it's been a playbook that's been used, as you say, multiple times. And we're concerned about that as well. You also have been watching and preparing for the Brazil Climate Summit, which seems to be something that you've been keeping tabs on wherever it pops up around the world, and need to be aware of that. What do we need to be watching out for there and how it might affect us?
Yeah, and I plan to be there, God willing. I went to the last one in Baku, Azerbaijan, the one before that on the Arabian Peninsula, the one before that in Egypt. So I try to go to these every year because they are so significant, Dunnigan. I think your average American is clueless about the role of the climate scam in the creation of this one world order because the media in the United States is very strategically keeping total silence about it. Occasionally they'll say something about, hottest year on record, everybody be scared. But generally speaking, very little reporting on these issues because they know most Americans don't believe the scam, and their own polling data shows that. I've got their polls. They know most Americans reject the hypothesis that human activities are destroying the climate. And they know that if Americans figured this out, that this was even happening, there would be an uprising and the whole clown show would be brought to a screeching halt. So this is one of the most important things happening in the world right now. The meeting that they're about to have in Brazil coming up later this year, the COP30 in Belém, is going to be the biggest of all the climate summits that has ever taken place. It happens with the backdrop of the International Court of Justice now preparing to issue the first ever ruling on what they're calling the legal obligations of states with respect to climate change. This is like the world Supreme Court, if you listen to the UN. And so this is coming to a head. Trump is doing his best to dismantle this. In fact, he said one of the top priorities of the MAGA movement needs to be to destroy the climate hoax. But and he's doing a good job on that here at home. Lee Zeldin just announced we're going to be turning back the clock on this endangerment finding. The idea that Barack Obama's EPA put this in, that CO2, the gas we exhale, is a dangerous pollution that needs to be regulated and controlled. So that's being wound back. And on his first day in office, Donald Trump signed the executive order on putting America first in international environmental agreements, not just getting us out of the Paris Agreement effective immediately, but getting us out of all UN climate agreements negotiated under the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. But what's happening in Brazil Under the Paris Agreement, every 5 years, governments are supposed to come with their new and improved pledges for how they're going to save humanity from climate change. Usually, Western countries promise they're going to keep dismantling their economy, keep destroying the middle class. Communist China promises they're going to keep building up their coal-fired power plants. They're going to keep building up their infrastructure and their manufacturing. So we're going to see what happens in Brazil now. I don't know whether the Trump administration is planning on sending anyone. When he was president last time, I was at the one in Poland, and Trump sent a hilarious delegation to troll them. They had a big event on how coal and oil were critical in liberating humanity from backbreaking labor and expanding life spans and all this. So this is going to be a really interesting climate summit with Trump saying we're not going to pay for this stuff anymore, and all the rest of the world saying, but you have to keep destroying your economy. So I'll do my best to keep the good folks informed, because unfortunately there is virtually no legitimate media that goes to these things anymore.
Turning to the finance part of Finance and Liberty, we have had interviewed Dr. Judy Shelton, former member of Trump's first-term advisory cabinet on economic affairs, and who has a current proposal for a 50-year U.S. Treasury bond backed by convertibility into gold. Trump has referred to himself sometimes as the gold president. He takes talking about a golden age for the United States, and yet it seems that the outward actions that we're seeing, well, other than saying maybe we should take a look in Fort Knox and make sure our gold is there, seem to be leading us in the direction of electronic currency, like either cryptocurrencies or perhaps even CBDCs that might follow. That. What are your views of the fate of gold and precious metals and constitutional, intrinsically valuable, sound constitutional money under the Trump presidency, and where do you think that we're going there, or are we heading inexorably towards this loss of privacy and complete captivity into the system that CBDCs would bring?
Well, I think we're at a fork in the road, Dunnigan, and I think Judy understands this very well. I was unbelievably pleased to see Trump nominate her last time around for the Federal Reserve Board. Of course, that didn't happen, but the fact that he nominated her was a very good sign that he gets this and that he's got people around him who get this. But we are at an important fork in the road. I think we are coming up on the global realization that there's a lot more paper gold than there is real gold, that the central banks of the world, especially the Federal Reserve, have been leasing out gold in increasing quantities as the price rises, to quote Alan Greenspan, former head of the Federal Reserve, in congressional testimony. So we're coming to the point where they're not going to be able to keep this scam up anymore, and that's going to lead to a very significant crisis. And out of that crisis, I think we could go, broadly speaking, one of two ways. Either we move back toward constitutional currency. Our Constitution says no state is able to make anything other than gold or silver into legal tender. We move back in that direction of sound money, getting rid of the Federal Reserve, rebuilding on a solid foundation, or we move very, very rapidly into either regional fiat currencies, if not outright global fiat currency under the IMF, something they've been preparing for several decades now, publicly at least. So we have a very, very dangerous situation emerging here. I think Trump understands this pretty well. I think he wants to do the right thing, but I think the headwinds from the deep state, from the globalists, from the IMF, from the World Bank, from the Federal Reserve, from the banking cartel, it's going to be very, very difficult. So, I think this is, again, somewhere where your viewers, your listeners need to be active in this process. Set up a meeting with your member of Congress. You're going to find very likely your member of Congress is clueless about these things. And I've talked to many members of Congress, some of them on the record. Congressman Alex Mooney, I interviewed him last year. He had a bill to repeg the U.S. dollar to gold. So there are some people in Congress who have a good grasp of these things, but the vast majority of the people in Congress are clueless. And so your listeners, I think, could play a very, very big role in educating their lawmakers on this before the crisis hits, because I tell you, if and when the crisis hits, and I expect it may be just around the corner, the establishment's going to have all the prepared talking points. It's going to be like we saw in 2008. If you don't pass this, there's going to be martial law. The banking system's going to collapse. People are going to starve. So they've got to be prepared in advance to move us in the right direction, and it's going to be a heavy lift.
Alex, if people want to follow your work, and you write and travel and contribute prodigiously in several different fields, but where's a good place for them to get connected in so that they'll keep up abreast of your work?
Well, thank you, Dunnigan. I serve as senior editor at The New American. People can find us at thenewamerican.com. And then my personal website, libertysentinel.org. I do a free newsletter twice a week, and I put almost everything I do from all the different places there. It's kind of like a central repository, and that's libertysentinel.org.
We've been speaking with Alex Newman, and we'll put the links to those references in the description of this video. If you don't want to miss a single episode with Alex or any of our other guests, make sure you're on our free mailing list at libertyandfinance.com. Go to libertyandfinance.com, put in your email address. It's private. We won't share it with anyone. And click submit. Make sure you confirm on the confirming email. You'll get one email in your inbox per day with our latest interviews, including all of those with Alex and any of our weekly specials. So, Alex, on behalf of all of our viewers and subscribers, thank you for joining us again on Liberty and Finance.
Thank you, Dunnigan. It's an honor.
This is Kaiser Johnson with Liberty and Finance. With premiums on US 90% silver constitutional coinage at multi-year lows, this may be an ideal time to swap silver bars or rounds for 90% silver and gain all the benefits of US mint lineage, legal tender status, non-reportability, and fractional utility. So right now we're running a special where we will swap any of your silver bars or rounds for 90% constitutional silver at a minimal premium difference. Call us for details.